when I set out on the sort of path of being an engineer, I was only interested in making records. I listened to music all the time, and I just wanted to be involved in the record production process. That was really what I was motivated by. And sort of try as I might to avoid it, I kept getting sucked into doing TV and bits and bobs that weren't really records. And I think it was probably to do with the fact that the course that I mentioned, which is the Tom Meister course at Surrey University, has a sort of it infuses its graduates with a sort of particular skill set that is appropriate for TV and film music, because it's a music degree, so you tend to be a little bit more sort of music savvy, really, and I mean, in a kind of schooled way, an academic way, and there's sort of technical skills that it teaches you just sort of marry very well with the world of TV and film. And so I would be in the studio, and one of my normal record studios that I was working in, and a job would come in. It might be a TV show or whatever, and I always seemed to get that job, really. And so it just sort of happened by sort of osmosis, really. I didn't really try at any point. And then when I came here, that very much was a conscious decision, because I'd like I say, sort of found myself being involved in film and TV projects here and there, and I'd really wanted to be involved in the record industry, and but it was waning quite significantly by the sort of early to mid 90s, the record work, that is, and so I saw an opportunity here, and I had a chat with Jeff Foster, the engineer, the chief engineer here, and luckily got myself a job here, and that very much was a conscious move into sort of film scoring, and so that's where it all started, really. I think one of the things that you find when you work here, sometimes you have to sort of pull yourself up on it, because I think it's very easy to be spoilt. The array of equipment and the technical standards that you can expect here, and it's good to remind yourself that everywhere is not like that. But and you can apply a similar thing with the sort of presence of George Martin, because he was very, very present when he was, towards the end of his career, and when he was still very well. And I mean, he was here pretty much all the time. And like you say, the first time you meet someone like George Martin, it's kind of slightly overwhelming, obviously, but soon it becomes familiar. And he was just an amazing ambassador for the place and for the music industry in general. And people would always just fall for his charms. The moment he would appear in the doorway, it would just be, everything would stop. But it was not a sort of anxious kind of like somebody who's really important here. It was just this, the head of the family had just walked in, So yeah, and so we saw him a lot, and I mean, I was lucky enough to work with him a few times as well, because he was still making records then, and I was involved in a few of them, so that was great. I mean, we're so spoiled. I mean, it's I keep saying the same thing, but we really are. It's very obvious. You just have to look around. I mean, you've got this amazing Neve console here, which, I mean, we've had Neves in air for since it was born, basically. But and this is the newest incarnation of it, which is an 88R, which is specifically for scoring and scoring mixing. And it's, I mean, we have, talking of luxuries, but we have an amazing mic cupboard here. I mean, you can just pretty much, you don't even need to know what's in it, because you can just say, I'd like this, that, and the other, and the chances are it's going to be there in the mic cupboard. And things like that, it's very, very easy to take for granted. You can't really overstate how much this brings to your working day, really. It's like you say, unless you go somewhere else and you don't have one, then you realise that you spend at least as much time thinking, worrying, being concerned about the actual kind of ins and outs of how you get signals from here to there. Whereas having a console like this, it's so transparent in the workflow that you can just purely focus on the job that you're doing. I'm looking at the musicians and the conductor and the composer, and I don't have to think about anything, because I can just set up all my groups, and it's all and it's just so transparent and so easy, and like the routing is so intuitive, and it's just basically a sort of transparent interface, like I say, and it's only when you don't have that and you go say to another studio that's not using a large format console like this, or you go to the somewhere in the middle of Europe, and all you've got is a Pro Tools controller and some mic pre's, and then you realise that it's utterly indispensable, because otherwise you're spending half your life just dealing with the trappings of the job and not the actual job itself. One of the things about working on the projects of the that kind of scale, we're talking about Marvel movies or, you know, just general large-scale movie scoring projects, is that there's an enormous amount of pressure and there's an enormous amount riding on it financially and everything else, and there's typically a room full of people, unfortunately not so much these days in our sort of pandemic times, but typically this particular room can comfortably have 20, 25 people in it sometimes, and you need to stay focused and you need to not be distracted by that. You're always under a pressure of time. I don't think I've ever been on a session where you're not under a pressure of time. And so you can't afford for things to go wrong. You can't just sort of say, oh, sorry guys, the desk has crashed. We need to, you know, we need to take a 25-minute break, because you can't do that. And you need to be able to do what you always do without even thinking about it. And that's what we do. You know, I can send in my session setup plans to the assistants, and I know that this console is going to handle that in the same way every time, and it will be seamless, and it will be totally, utterly dependable, which is really what you need, because there is no room for, you know, sort of technical breakdowns, really. I think even people that aren't associated with the recording world know the word Neve. They know, basically, most people know what it is, really. And I mean, I was aware of, you know, the sort of legacy of the company long before I ever set foot in a studio. And since then, it wasn't only the first thing that I encountered, which it was all the consoles at the university that I went to were old Neves. They weren't old at the time, but they are now. And then ever since, I don't think I've ever actually walked into a studio without there being some Neve presence there, you know. And the interesting thing about the company is that it doesn't just sort of rest on its laurels and rely on, you know, its legacy and the vintage gear, which obviously is, you know, well known for being incredible and desirable. But instead, there's a commitment to sort of move with the times. And this particular console here is an example of it, really, because I mean, we were recording on Neves in pretty much every orchestral scoring room in the world quite a long time ago, before this console was put in here. But what happened was that with, you know, the introduction of Pro Tools and sort of expanding track counts and the possibility of delivering multiple stems to a dub, it sort of became apparent that although we all wanted what we associated with the quality and the aesthetic quality of the sound, we wanted a bit more than that, really, in terms of, you know, the sort of usability of it, really. And Neve realised that pretty early on, and took it very seriously, and invested a lot of time and effort into coming up with this sort of centre section that we see here, which was a huge step forward. And I think that really consolidated Neve's position in the world of scoring, really. I mean, I'm struggling to think of any major scoring stage or studio in the world where there isn't a Neve. More and more work is being in, you know, sort of, as we call it, in the box, really. You know, everything's just happening inside Pro Tools, and typically we either push up a couple of faders or listen to an external, and you know, and there's no doubt about it, and I don't think anybody would really contest this, that you definitely lose something. You know, I mentioned earlier on about this whole thing with vintage Neves, where just pushing the faders up makes a difference. Well, it absolutely does. And you know, if you listen to our the Montserrat console, it actually wasn't the one that was in Montserrat, but there were 3 identical consoles made, and that one used to be in the old Air in Oxford Street. And it absolutely sounds better just going through the faders. So, I mean, one of the things I like to try to do is to sort of incorporate the best of both worlds, really, because I mean, obviously there is a lot of useful work that you can do in Pro Tools that you can't do on an old desk. For instance, you know, like we often have to mix 40 odd cues, you know, for 50 cues or whatever for a film score, and there'll be a review, and we might need to go back and forth and jump between them, and you know, having to manually recall settings on a desk is kind of cumbersome, really. But what it is nice to do is to bring as many outputs as you can or want to up the desk, and just put the faders in the line and just, you know, like reap the benefits of that, you know, the sonic quality that just running through the electronics brings to it, really. And that way you definitely can get the best of both worlds, really.